Hello, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about the communication process. So, most of us communicate on a very, very regular basis. Most of our lives we are communicating. And because it's something we've done for so long, we assume it's something that's super natural. But today we're going to break down what exactly communication is and all of the things that can go wrong in the process of communication. And by the end of our lesson, you'll be able to tell me why me teaching you this lesson in a video is probably not the best way for me to have done it due to some of those barriers. All right, so first off, what is communication? Okay, our definition for today is that it is an interpersonal between multiple people process of sending and receiving symbols with messages attached to them. All right. So communication really does encompass a lot of things. Most people, when they think of communication, they think of talking. Okay. But it can be writing, it can be texting, it can be drawing, it can be sending emojis. Anytime two or more people are trying to send and receive messages from each other, we have communication. So it can also be with facial expressions. Okay, I'm sure you've heard of body language. All of those aspects are considered a part of communication. The key here being that one person is trying to send and have another person receive some sort of message. Then it's communication. All right. Our communication process, how it happens, is that we're going to have one person who we deem to be the sender. They want to get one sort of message or idea across to the receiver. Okay, this is the other person that's involved, or the receivers if there's multiple people involved. Okay, they have the actual message that they are trying to send, and in this case, because it's verbal communication, this seems obvious. Okay, the sender is saying, "Hi, how is your sister?" Okay, but that's not always the case if it's not verbal. Okay, what is the message we're trying to send? Are we trying to send a message that we're scared, and we're doing that with a facial expression? Are we trying to send a message that we agree, and we do that with an emoji? Okay. For that message to get from person one, the sender, to person two, the receiver, it has to go through what we call a medium or a method. Okay, and this is the type of communication that is happening. So as I mentioned, if he was saying this, then the medium would be verbal. The voice sounds that are being created is the medium. Okay, if I was sending an emoji, the medium would be a text message. All right. And then in most communication processes, we have some sort of feedback. Okay. This can come through the same medium. Okay. If the receiver verbally responds back to the sender, or it could come through a different medium. They could make a facial expression, and so we're doing it visually. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I've been having conversations with people through multiple forms at the same time. So I might text them one thing and then they happen to respond to me in a DM on another platform. So those would be different mediums. Okay. But in reality, for communication to happen, we really do need this sending and some sort of feedback. Okay. Some of us get that from the notification saying the message has been read. Okay. We get that from seeing facial expression and knowing that they've heard us, or through an actual reply. All right, when we are communicating, there are two things that we are aiming for. The first one is effective communication. All right, most of you probably heard these terms. If you have ever written a resume or applied for a job, they love to ask for effective communication. Okay, effective communication is that the communication process worked. And what that means is that the message that was sent is the message that was received. Okay, that might sound obvious at first, but I want you to think about the types of communications you've had today. Do you know for sure that the message that you sent is the message that was received? Okay, were you making a face at a friend across a classroom when the teacher wasn't looking? Are you sure they got what you were trying to say? Okay, when you sent that text message or those DMs or emojis, did they get the meaning that you were originally putting behind the message, and even in a verbal one? Okay, efficient communication is that the cost of the communication is at a minimum. And cost, we're talking about time, we're talking about energy, and we could be talking about physical actual cost as well. All right. Unfortunately, these two things often come on opposite ends of the communication spectrum. Okay, and so that is why our goal has to be both. And often to get more efficient communication, we might give up effectiveness. And to get more effective communication, we may give up some of that efficiency. Okay, so it's all about kind of finding the right balance to be able to make it both effective and efficient. All right, so now we're going to add to our process. So I know this visual is slightly different, but it basically is the same thing. We still have our first party, which is our sender. Okay, they have an intended message. It's going to go through that medium, that channel. It's going to get to the receiver, who is then going to decode it and interpret what it says. Okay, but what we're going to be looking at right now is what we call noise in the communication channel. So whichever channel we have chosen to do this communication across, I'm sending a text message, I am talking to somebody, I'm talking to somebody on the phone, whatever that is, there is a whole bunch of possible what we call noise that could get in the way to make it that the message that I sent is not the message that was received. And I have this little visual here of this really, really long string paper telephone that maybe you made one of these when you were a kid, or maybe not. Where it's taking so long to get there, maybe we won't do it. The other thing you can think of is those telephone games that you used to play where one person passed it to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and then the last person generally didn't get the same thing that was originally sent, okay? So that's what we're going to be looking at here. So the sender has already picked their message channel or their medium. They've put their message into it, and as it is on the way to the receiver, these are some things that could possibly go wrong or could possibly change what the receiver is going to receive. All right, the first one is what we call semantics. Okay, what this is that the meaning behind the words could be different than what was originally intended. Okay, and there's lots of reasons for that. So the example that I give is if I have chosen to communicate a message, I bought a new car. Okay, I might do that verbally, I might do that in writing. Okay, when you hear that, what do you envision? As a receiver, what might you envision? Okay, because here's the thing. When I came to you and said, I bought a new car, I bought a car that was new to me. It was a used car, but it's new to me. Okay, so my statement is still correct, but that's probably not what you originally envisioned when I said I bought a new car. You were probably envisioning the shiny, sparkly, you're the first one to buy it, new car smell, etc., etc. And this is what we call semantics, when the words we use, whether verbal or written, or we could extend it as far as emoji, have one meaning to us, but have a different meaning to somebody else. Okay, and that's not language barriers. That is what we call semantics. Okay, and in the English language, we have a lot of them. And in industries, we have a lot of them. We have very specific words that we use in industry for certain things that maybe don't mean the same thing to an everyday person that is hearing this. Okay. So that could be the first problem that happens that results in the receiver not getting the message that was originally sent. Okay, the next one could be an absence of feedback. And I understand that this is a little bit different in that, like, we're just missing this component at the bottom. Okay, but the problem with an absence of feedback is that we don't know if that person did get the right message. Okay, so we don't know if there was a semantic issue, or we don't know if they even heard us in the first place. Okay, so a lot of students relate to this one on the lack of like a red feature on a certain platform of DMing or texting or anything like that. Okay, originally that whole concept of you send a message and you can see that it's been delivered and then you can see that it's read, that was copyrighted by BlackBerry, by RIM, and so that's why a lot of the other platforms didn't have it originally. And now that it's something that we are very used to, it's very difficult when you don't have that mechanism anymore. Did they see the text message? Did it not get to them? Okay. The example that I put here, right? I might say something like, call Nancy. And you might have heard like tall Nancy. And if I'd have had feedback, I would have heard you be like, yeah, Nancy's tall. And then I would have been like, what? And I would have known that you didn't get the message that I originally sent. But if there wasn't that feedback, if I couldn't see your face to see that you're comprehending what I'm saying, I didn't hear back from you at all, I don't know if that communication was effective or not. Okay. The next one is choosing the improper channel. The medium that we use to send our messages is extremely important. And the biggest factor that causes miscommunication is communicating on the wrong medium. Why does that happen? One, we're generally aiming for efficiency when we're choosing our mediums, which isn't always going to be the best depending on what the message is. And two, we generally have a preference for how we want to communicate, what makes us comfortable, and that also might not be the most proper one. Okay, so if you, for example, in business, send an email, it is an understood norm that the person has 3 to 5 business days to respond to you. Okay, so if I'm doing a project and I need an answer by the end of the day, sending an urgent email is not effective communication. That person is not being set up to understand the urgency of their response or the message or the situation that somebody is in, because they're not set up, their life isn't set up in a way that they would get that message urgently. Okay. Another example that probably has happened in your own life is when people send some sort of criticism or constructive feedback over text message or in writing, even in an email. Okay. Writing, we lose facial expression, we lose body language, we lose context, and there's a lack of compassion involved with it. And so it's generally going to come off a lot harder than it was needing to be. And so that's why in human resources, they always say that any sort of feedback, constructive criticism, coaching, firing of people, like anything that could be perceived as harsh, needs to be done in person. And verbally, so that we know that it's done both effectively and efficiently. All right. And then also on the reverse side, sometimes doing things verbally is not the best thing. Okay. I've had a colleague stop me in the hallway and tell me all these details about an event that they want me to help with. And they've told me a time and they've told me a place and they've told me students' names and they've told me all of these things about it. And that's not going to stick in my brain, right? So there is a time and a place for like, hey, I want to touch base with you and find out if you're interested in helping. And then if I say yes, it can be like, okay, I'm going to send you all the details in written form so that I can go back to them and I don't have to rely on my memory to remember all of those details. Okay, it would be kind of like somebody coming up to you and describing a painting instead of letting you see the painting. Like there's just a time and a place. All right. So we have to be really careful when we're choosing our channels. What is going to be the most efficient? Yes. Comfortable, ideally, but the most effective for the type of communication and the type of message that we are trying to get across, ensuring that there's not going to be a lack of feedback or other noise in the way. All right, the next one is a little more on the nose and very literal for the name of it, which is noise, which is actual physical distractions or barriers. So it could actually be noise. Like you're trying to talk to somebody and it's so loud that the receiver is only hearing every half of a word. And so they're getting a different message from you. Okay. If somebody was doing a visual presentation and you're stuck behind like a pole and you can't see the writing on the screen. Okay. It can also be just distraction from what is going on. And different people have different levels of this. I really, really struggle to focus on one person talking if there is other noise or other conversations. My brain just jumps to those conversations. And so I don't have the ability or struggle to give you my full attention, which means I'm not getting the full message from what you are saying to me. All right. So that would be another noise that gets in the way when that message is trying to get from the sender to the receiver. Okay. The next one could be status effect. Okay. So if the sender and the receiver have different statuses, either socially or in the business that they are in, this is often going to affect generally the receiver's capacity to fully receive the message the way that it needs to be. Okay. So some examples of this could be if somebody that's in quite a low position in a business was making a suggestion to somebody higher up. A status effect could be that receiver not giving their full attention or fully considering what's being said to them, because they have this idea of status and that this person doesn't necessarily know what they're talking about. Okay. I think status effect should come across a lot right now in a lot of the messages that are trying to be sent across social media through TikToks and YouTube videos and Instagram reels, etc. Okay. If you're watching somebody giving you medical advice and then you're like, well, you're not a doctor, then I'm not personally going to take what they're saying seriously, because I don't acknowledge there's no status. There's not a level of status that I require to hear that message from you effectively. Okay. The other thing that can come into play with status effect is the terminology that we use. And so, especially in business, if we are speaking to someone who we believe to be at a certain status, right? So if I'm working in the accounting department, talking to somebody else who works in the accounting department, I'm going to use terminology that is really specific to that job that we are doing. Okay. And so if somebody else isn't in that level of status, they work in marketing or they work somewhere else, they may not understand that message that is there. But because I use it on my everyday, I assume that they do. Okay. So often when I talk with a background in accounting, I talk about the P&L a lot. And most people have no idea what I'm talking about. Okay. So that term isn't relevant to the receiver, but it's not like obnoxious enough that they maybe are going to say anything about it. They're just going to kind of glide over that portion of the conversation, which means they're not getting the full message that I'm sending them. Okay. Another one can come from cultural differences, and this is culture, not language. Okay. Because language is its whole other category, but cultural, if you don't know, culture is, all sorts of morals, ethics, standards, customs, things that you expect and ways that we communicate, that come from our upbringing. So that can come from who raised us, that can come from religion, that can come from a country of origin or an ethnicity. We all have culture that has kind of defined who we are and what we expect. Okay. And cultural differences can affect communication. So the biggest one that I will put forward to you would be time. Okay. So in your culture, if somebody says the party starts at 5, or if somebody says I'll meet you at 5, that's going to mean something different to every single person. Okay. So if I say the party starts at 5, what time would you show up at? Okay. My parents would show up 5 minutes before 5, because if you are 1 minute late, then like that is a cardinal sin in their eyes. Okay. Even like not being 5 minutes early is considered late. That's how I was raised. Okay. My husband's family, who comes from Cameroon, Africa, will probably arrive 2 to 3 hours after the time that I said. Okay. And that's not them being rude. That is the way that they communicate time. Everybody knows that for a social gathering, you come this much after the time that was stated. Okay. And then there's all sorts of spectrums in between. Okay. This is somewhat understood with time. There's lots of pop culture references to it. And that is there. And these would be things that are called cultural differences. So, when we have an event for my kids, for example, we actually give different times to different people from different cultures so that they will all end up arriving at the same time. And that's actually effective communication on our part, because we are taking into account the noise of cultural differences, so that the message that I want, which is I want your body in my house at 3:00, is the message that is received by my mother-in-law or my father-in-law that are from Cameroon when I tell them to come at 1. And it's the message that's received when I tell my parents to show up at 3:15. And it's the message that's received when I tell my best friend, who's always a half an hour late, to come at 2:30. Okay, so I'm actually being more efficient and effective with my communication by taking those cultural differences into effect. But at the same time, I could end up with an event that have people coming in at all different times with ineffective communication if I don't take this into account. The other thing that can come from cultural differences is terminology. Okay, which I hope is fairly obvious. There's lots of terms that are used in different cultures. If you're asked to bring something, if even what it is, we invited my family to my son's born house, and they were like, "You're what? What?" Because that's not a terminology that means anything to them. Okay, so again, those cultural differences could get in the way. So again, just to reiterate these are the things that are causing issues as the message goes from the sender to the receiver. Okay. So that's a lot of things that could go wrong in the process. And that's a lot of things that we as a sender need to take into account when we are creating that message that we are going to send. Okay. In business, we have to be very methodical about the messages that we send, but you can hopefully start to understand that all of our communication in all aspects of our lives goes through this process. And so that is often why communicating can be really, really tiring. Or by the end of a day, we are less effective at our communication because for our own families or the people that we love, we have spent so much brain energy during the day to make sure that this is happening properly in a professional standard that we just don't have necessarily the energy to deduce all of this in that other standings. Okay. But believe it or not, there is another step, because here's the thing. When I have a message that I want to send, okay, let's say that my message is as simple as like, I want to greet somebody. In essence, I want to be like, I acknowledge your existence and I see you there. Okay. I'm going to encode that message. I'm going to put that into something. Okay, I'm going to choose to verbally say, hey, or I'm going to choose to smile and wave as I walk by, or I'm going to choose to do the like half smile, like head nod as I walk by to the neighbor. Or in a text message, I might send a little emoji or sup or like whatever. I know I'm old. Whatever that message is. Okay, so I have what we call encoded that message. I've then sent it across the channel, and hopefully there hasn't been like a physical barrier that resulted in the person not seeing me waving, or noise so they didn't hear it, or status effect, or cultural differences, or semantics, or anything along the way. Let's say that my hey, or no, let's do a different one. Let's say that my like half smile and head nod got across. The receiver saw it. Okay. We now have this process where the receiver has to take the message that they've received and they have to figure out the meaning behind it. And we call this perceived meaning. Okay. What does it mean to you when somebody walking by goes, because that could be different for different people. And that's what we're looking at here. So once the receiver has gotten that message, whether it is hearing the words that you've said, reading the lines of text that you've said, seeing the symbol that you said, getting the DM that you sent, they now have to interpret it. Okay. So as I said, perception can influence how people communicate and how they actually behave towards each other. Even if there is none of that noise, okay, inaccurate perception could derail your communication. Okay, there's a whole bunch of these online. I'm sure you've seen them before, the pink or the blue dress, the different things like that. These all have to do with perceptive. So when you look at this animal, what do you see? Okay, if we were in class together, you would all yell it out, and we would realize that not everybody actually sees the same thing. Okay, I believe there's a duck or a bunny, or there's another one usually that people see. Okay, and what do you see here? Do you see an old lady? Do you see a young lady? Okay, and that has to do with perception. So I put a visual in front of you. I'm assuming you can see your screen. Okay, that there's none of this noise that's going on. There isn't visual problems or anything like that. You got the message. But your perception of the message, what you believe this picture is telling you, is ending up being different, and possibly different from what I was sending you. All right. And that's what we're talking about with perception. Some of the things that can cause issues with perception could be stereotypes. Okay. Most of you have probably learned about stereotypes with a really negative tone to them. Okay. But if you are not sure, the actual definition of stereotypes is that it's a widely held, fixed, or oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing. Stereotypes are often perceived as being bad. Okay, but the thing I want you to remember is that everybody has stereotypes. That is part of how our brain actually works. Our brain, biologically from forever ago, realized that it's too busy. There's too much to do, and so it puts things in categories that it believes to be true, most likely to be true, in order to simplify its own processes. Okay, and most of the time, these stereotypes do us well. Sometimes they don't. Okay. And so if somebody is walking around, when people are walking around with stereotypes, if they don't take a minute to check it, then there might be something that is necessarily like off about this. Okay. So one of the examples that we see in the workplace is when people talk about their end times in the day. Okay. This one was from personal experience. So when I was single and I was younger, if my end time was 5 o'clock, I would have people like all the time coming up to my desk at like 4:45, even 5 o'clock, expecting that I would stay 15, 20 minutes. No big deal. What I thought was really, really interesting is once I became a mother, nobody did that anymore. I actually had somebody at my desk at 4:45 when I worked in industry before becoming a teacher, and they looked at the clock and they were like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. No, I'll come talk to you tomorrow. I know you have to go right at 5." Okay. And this is a stereotype, and it worked well for me in that second situation. But the fact that we just make these assumptions about people because of a category or group that they are in. Okay. And so let's be honest, when we talk about stereotypes, if I am walking alone and it is getting dark outside and somebody does the little like at me and they happen to be a very tall, very muscular man that has a hood up, I am not going to get a like, hey, friendly vibe as the message that's coming in from your communication. Okay. I'm going to get I need to cross the street. I'm not safe. That's the message I'm going to receive from your communication. Okay, so these stereotypes can affect it one way or the other of what that message is that's coming across. Okay, the next one is a little bit more complex, and it's called the halo effect. Okay, I want you to think of this one really, in case you don't know what a halo is, they talk about them. It's kind of like this like invisible but somehow visible thing that exists. Okay, and what this is, again, this is a brain thing. This is a very normal brain thing that happens. We don't have to feel bad about ourselves for this happening, but we have to know about it. Okay. It can also be kind of, sometimes people often refer to this as bias. Bias is technically slightly different, but it's similar in essence. What this is that if one person has a trait about them that we know well, that we deem to be a good thing, okay, then our brain is rapidly, when they have to make decisions about other aspects of this person, going to assume a similar pattern for them. Okay. So for teachers, we're very well aware that the halo effects we have to watch out for is that students that are well behaved, that are not a problem in a physical classroom, are often assumed by our brains to also be smart and will also get their work done on time, and will also, that work will be high level and they will end up with good grades. Okay. And so teachers have to be aware of that halo effect, and we need to actively make sure that we are assessing in a way that is not being affected by that. Of course, this can happen in the reverse. If you've had an interaction with somebody that has, for whatever reason in that scope, been not good, and we often see this in all of those types of like mean girl movies or different things like that, right? For whatever reason, you were on opposing teams or you both like the same guy, like it's all very stereotypical. But anyways, there's a reason why you're like, I don't like that person. And then like later on in the movie, they're like, oh, they're actually a good person and there's lots about them that are awesome. Okay, so it's this understanding that whatever that first impression that we have of a person is, our brain automatically delegates that to the other aspects of what we are talking about. Okay. In business, in marketing, they actually use the halo effect on a very regular basis. That is the whole scope of celebrity sponsorship of product, right? Like, really, like, do we know that Taylor Swift is an expert on Diet Pepsi or Diet Coke? No. I, I I don't know any credentials that makes her know if a pop is good. But because I really like her music and I really like the way that she treats her fans, or that I really like her political stance or lack thereof, I'm going to trust that she has good taste in pop, and I'm going to buy that pop. Okay. And so this in essence is the halo effect, and this can affect the message that we are receiving. Okay. All the time, right? You'll hear somebody will say something to you. Okay. And it could be the exact same thing in the exact same tone. And that halo effect is going to affect what that is. Okay. I've had in the past principals and vice principals who have come up to my classroom and they've stepped in. In essence, they're my boss, and they've stepped into that room. And most likely the way they stepped into the room and the way they stood there and waited for my attention was the exact same. But my past interactions with them and my opinion of them, I'm going to get a different message. Okay. One principal, when they stepped in, it was like total happy vibes from it, right? Like they were there to support me. They were there to encourage. They were there to participate. Another principal comes in, and again, because of those past experiences, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. What did I do wrong? Okay. And that is due to the halo effect. Okay. The next one is what we call selective perception. Our brains, again, very, very natural of our brains, okay, to either not notice or to more quickly forget things that cause us emotional discomfort. Okay. If you've ever heard the saying, you're looking at it through rose-colored glasses. Okay. Or I always say my example is having children, like how a woman would choose, and I'm a woman that did it, to choose to have a second child after going through that level of pain. Like, why would you do that? Well, because our brains are wired to very quickly forget or ignore emotional discomfort or things that contradict our previous beliefs. Okay. So I believed forever that, children are awesome and giving birth can't be that painful. And then I had this moment that was horrendous, but my brain is like, wow, that doesn't match what I believed before. And that causes me some discomfort. So I'm just going to kind of forget about that. And then you end up in the same position again. Okay. Again, we're talking about either emotional discomfort, something that we're not used to dealing with. Again, our brain gets emotional discomfort whenever there's anything that goes against the stereotypes and biases that are ingrained in our brains, or contradicting our previous beliefs about a person. Okay. So like I said, when there's a person that I don't like because they've done something wrong to me, if they come out and show up for me and do something good, I'm likely going to forget that one experience because that's contradictory to what I believe about this person, and going to go back to my original belief systems. Okay. So unfortunately, this can definitely come to play in our work environments. And the biggest one that we see of this is that in promotions. Okay. There was a study done in 2021 that showed that at the highest levels, okay, people that, and generally we need to add to this, we need to talk about, cis, straight, white men, okay, get promoted even if their overall performance is lower than somebody else, because hiring people have an assumption in their brain about who that person is based off of those bias and stereotypes that they have. And any of those like moments when they didn't do it right, those are moments of discomfort for them. And so their brain's going to forget that. Whereas on the other side, when there's somebody that your brain doesn't traditionally associate with the role, okay, is doing it, their great performances are actually causing this level of emotional discomfort. And I'm not saying that people are sitting there being like, I'm uncomfortable when a woman is successful. You are not consciously doing this, okay? But your brain has decided that this is the norm in this category. And so no matter what the actual reports show you, there's going to be this selective perception. And the selective perception is that you're just going to ignore certain things in the process. Okay. The same could be true in reverse in a female dominated field. We see this a lot in nursing. Okay. We assume that a nurse should look a certain way, be a certain gender, et cetera, et cetera. And so a really, really high performing nurse that isn't in that category, we may forget aspects of them being awesome at their job. Okay. So this can include previous experiences with a specific person. It can include attitudes or beliefs that we have. It can include conditioning that we received when we were younger. And it is often associated with gender, age, race, as well as our emotional state. Okay. For some people, it is uncomfortable for them. There is emotional discomfort with people that are more or less emotional. And so they're going to lean that way as well. Okay. So selective perception. And this can happen at the big scale, like I talked about with getting or losing jobs, or at a much smaller scale. Okay. Again, with my example of walking at night. Okay. If that person had actually just like smiled and waved and been somebody that I knew, okay, I might selectively perceive, not catch the smile at all, and just see a hand motion once again from, let's say, a really, really tall build man, and I could still perceive that to be a threat, even if there is like overwhelming evidence that it's not, because it's contradictory to what I associate as happening in this situation. And so my brain just literally chooses not to fully perceive what's happening. Okay. The next one is what we call projection. Okay. So going back to this discomfort that we have, another thing that our body naturally does is as a human ego defends itself against unconscious impulses or quality by denying their existence in themselves. Okay. So often what happens, you are literally projecting something onto somebody else. Okay. And ironically, it's like the opposite of, so if there's something that you don't like about yourself, okay, it's more likely that you are going to project that onto somebody else or find that irritating in somebody else. Okay. And that in essence is a way of kind of like defending our own ego and our own discomfort around the impulses and the natural state of who we are. Okay. So my example is growing up, my dad hated that I was an emotional person. I would get yelled at all the time. I like screamed at if I cried. And just no, like you are not going to be emotional. You should not be emotional. And the irony of all of this is he is one of the most emotional people that I know. Okay. And so again, it's this projection of something. And you know what? It couldn't even come from a place of goodness. I don't want you to go through the harm that I've gone through from being this way. So I'm going to try to make this not happen for you. Okay. It is very natural. I don't hate my father. This isn't what I'm saying. And I see myself naturally going to do this with my own children. Okay. And so again, when we're talking about communication, when we're talking about different things like that, somebody who doesn't like that they're very emotional might get frustrated and check out and not receive a whole message from somebody that is showing emotion. Okay. Or is hearing a message about emotion and why it's healthy, or something like that. So that perceived message is going to get altered, because of this projection of something that we don't like about ourselves. All right. So I understand that was a lot of information. Hopefully you were taking some notes and you can kind of keep this. I'm a very visual learner, so that's why I have this visual that I'm showing you. Okay. But again, every time we try to communicate something, the sender has to take that message that they want to say. They need to decide how they're going to do it. They're going to decide on a medium. They're going to put it out there. They're going to hopefully alleviate any noise that's going to get in the way so that message can get to the receiver. And then hopefully they've put it in a way that the receiver is going to be able to decode it without any of these issues with perception along the way. And then we'll get some feedback to see if it actually worked properly. All right. So that, in a nutshell, is communication, and hopefully both effective and efficient communication.